This is my mum and dad's dining table, which we've just worked out they've had for 34 years. And it came with these 4 dining chairs, which at the time was perfect for my mum, my dad, my brother and myself. But since then the family has grown, and how do you make a dining table designed for 4 people accommodate 8 people? Well, that's for me to figure out, but first we're going to need to take some dimensions. The dining chairs and the frame of the table are all made from solid rubber wood, which is an inexpensive Far Eastern hardwood. The tabletop is MDF with a veneer which I think could be ash, so somewhat unusually, it doesn't match the wood used on the table frame and chairs. Not that it really matters because there's always a tablecloth on this table anyway. The edges of the tabletop have this bullnose profile, which I'm going to have to try and replicate on the extension. And this room isn't particularly big, so we need to maintain some kind of walkway over here. Now somewhere up here, I think I have some salvaged rubber wood, which I got from a friend of mine's double bed frame, and it's very dusty, but hopefully there'll be enough here to do the job. This wood has a few holes in it, but I can put them on the underside of the top. A quick drawing confirmed that I had enough material to work with here, so I can start cutting everything down to size. And I'm running the edges that will meet over the planer so that they all meet up perfectly. To keep all the boards aligned, I'm going to add some 8mm dominoes. And then I can get it all clamped up, and to make sure it goes together nice and straight, I'm just going to clamp on these metal bars which came from an old desk frame. I can then get it cut to final dimensions and give it all a good sanding at 120 and then 240 grit. And I added some filler to the holes on the underside. As I mentioned earlier, I want to try and replicate that bullnose profile on the edge of the tabletop. And then on the edge that meets the old tabletop, I basically want to create the opposite of that bullnose shape. In other words, a cove, so that it butts up against the old tabletop without leaving too much of a gap. But I don't have either of those router cutters, and I don't particularly want to buy them because I might never use them again. So for the bullnose, I'm going to use my biggest roundover bit, but I lowered it in the table, and then using an offcut of the same material as a test piece, I take a pass, flip the board, and then take another pass. This took a little bit of tweaking to get the height of the bit right, but eventually I had a shape which looked pretty similar to the original top, so I could then make those cuts to 3 edges of the tabletop. Then I fitted a regular cove bit, and again, by taking multiple passes, I can get a shape close to what I'm aiming for here. But I did need to use a gouge just to cut away some ridges, and then some sandpaper wrapped around a dowel to refine the shape and smooth things over. I did a final sanding by hand, and then I'm going to add some water-based varnish. This will help preserve the pale colour of the timber. After applying 3 coats to both the top and the bottom, denibbing in between of course, once dry I was left with a beautifully smooth finish. Now I need to work on how the new top is going to mount to the old table. And for that I'm going to need 3 rails, which I can rip from some of the offcuts. These rails are going to need a hole drilled at each end, and I'm going to do that at the pillar drill to make sure it's at 90 degrees to the face of the board, and then I can transfer that same hole onto the other 2 rails. I'm going to add a shape to the ends of the rails, and after marking up I get them taped together and rough cut that shape out at the bandsaw. Then on 2 of the rails, I'm drilling out the holes to 22mm in diameter because I want to be able to insert some of this dowel I had in the workshop, which measures just under 23mm. Unfortunately, I don't have a 23mm bit though, so I'm just going to wiggle the drill around to ream out the holes. I add a round over to the rails and get them sanded. And these bits at the end are going to be a nice place to add a mechanical fixing point, so I drill out a pilot hole on each end of each rail. I can then get a couple of lengths of the dowel cut, and I tapered the ends a bit just to make it easier to add these to 2 of the 3 rails that I'd prepared. And these 2 are going to get glued and screwed to the underside of the top. I also drilled a pilot hole through the dowels so that I can secure them in place with screws too. And I ended up adding another screw in the middle of the rails just to make sure they are nice and solid. On the morning that I had planned to go and install this, I realised that I hadn't left myself enough time to add finish to these components on the underside of the top. But fortunately I had some spray varnish, and this cures much quicker, so I can get a couple of coats of this on within an hour. I'm also just going to add my maker's mark on the underside just so that my parents don't forget who made this for them. And the final job before I go and install it is to grab a couple of these toggle clamps from my drawer. Right, back at my parents' now, and using the 3rd rail I'd prepared earlier, I can use this clamped in place as a drilling guide to drill a couple of holes through the apron rail of the table. This might seem a bit barbaric, but there's always a tablecloth on this table anyway, so no one's ever going to see these holes. Alternatively, another option could be to rotate the table 180 degrees so that the holes are less visible in the room. Once again, I need to widen the holes, and this took a few attempts as I wanted it to be a reasonably tight fit, but it also needs to be able to slide in reasonably easily. And wiggling the drill bit like I did leaves a ridge in the middle of the hole, so I'm using a round file just to remove that ridge. Then I can add the top and figure out where I want my 3rd rail to be fitted, which is going to be secured to the underside of the original tabletop. Finally, I can decide where I want the clamps to be positioned, and those of you who are more clever than me will spot that I really didn't think this through as much as I should have. These red handles aren't going to be able to close because they'll hit into the rail, so here's the moment of realisation, and I got them repositioned. A bit of candle wax on these dowels is going to help the top slide in place a lot easier with less friction. Then the toggle clamps can be adjusted to pull the top in nice and snug. And now there's enough space for 3 more chairs at this end, and the table can be pulled out a bit from the window to accommodate another seat at the opposite end. So that's it done. Now, where's the food? This extension can easily cope with the weight of a few plates and elbows, but we'll just need to be careful that no one decides to sit on it. Thank you for watching.